Hey, what's up, North House Folk School? I'm Nate Johnson, and we're going to do a short video on traditional snowshoes, snowshoe making, design materials, things like that for the winter's gathering. Thanks so much for having me here. We thought we'd start with the black ash tree. This is the tree I'm most familiar with using for snowshoes, and is a traditional, historic, and currently used tree in eastern North America, from here east and north, wherever it grows. My Anishinaabe friends tell me one of the names for this tree translates to the snowshoe tree. So I know it's black ash. We're in a swamp here, wet area. Black ash likes wet often, so it's a little bit drier, but got a lot of ash and maybe some elm mixed in. And it's got corky bark, kind of flaky. Kind of flakes off easily, especially on younger trees. It's very corky. You can't see it, but it's opposite branching with big thick twigs, so those are some things to look for. This particular tree is growing up a little bit out of the wettest area, which is good because it'll tend to grow a little faster. We do want a fast growing tree. That's very important. A slow growing tree with tight growth rings is very brittle, and those big wide growth rings of a fast growing tree are strong and flexible, and it's very important for to have a durable snowshoe and for it to bend well. So looking for fast growing tree, you get an eye for it. You're looking for a big crown, not growing in the understory, so not being shaded out. This particular tree has a pretty small crown, and there's some things about the bark that tell me it's probably slower growing. So despite the fact that it is straight grain, you can't really discern a twist in the bark. Sometimes you can see that in the bark, you'll see it twisting. There's no real knots for 5 feet. It's relatively straight. My guess is it's a slow growing tree. If I weren't sure, I would take my axe and make a little notch near the base so that I could actually see the growth rings. As you get more experienced with this, you don't need to do as much notching, you just know. And interestingly, the characteristics that make a good snowshoe tree are also what makes a good basket tree, if you're into black ash basket making. So other good trees in this area would white birch or paper birch would be traditionally used. It can be a little harder to split. It is easy carving, and you also need a very fast growing tree for that. Also important. But I mostly seem to use black ash. It's easy to split. The strength to flexibility ratio is really great. So yeah, good tree. So we'll head up and look at some snowshoes I have and talk more. So I have here snowshoes that I've made over the years and a few other examples. So we'll just go over some traditional snowshoe styles, materials used to make them, and some basic tools and a few resources. So I'm going to start with my favorite snowshoe, and it's only my favorite because it's what got me really excited about traditional snowshoe making. And it's the Athabascan snowshoe, what we now consider, what some of us maybe now consider the Athabascan snowshoe, only because there was a book written about it. And Athabascan are indigenous people just north of the St. Lawrence River in Quebec, related to the Cree north of them, Anishinaabe to the south and west. And they have a square toe, and they're one-piece frame. This is the first pair I made right here, and probably the second pair of snowshoes that I made. And as you can see, one-piece frame. These are yellow birch, and they're flat, which is a characteristic of most traditional snowshoes, whereas opposed to today, which has they all have upturned toes on them. You won't see that in a lot of traditional snowshoes, though you will in some. And the upturn isn't necessary. It can be helpful, but you learn to walk on these differently, and it's how it is. And these are a pair I made after those is these right here, and this is a copy from the book. These are, I think these are 18 inches wide and 45 inches long, which for the region these were developed would still be considered small for a man's snowshoe, and by modern standards they're unbelievably large. But you have to think about needing a snowshoe not for recreation but to survive for your life. And so these are finely woven caribou hide in the tips and tails, deer hide in the center. The pattern is actually woven into the snowshoe. There's an extra twist at each intersection with the pattern. It's highlighted with paint. And these have been my primary snowshoe for the last few years now, and I've walked on them hundreds of miles, and none the worse for wear. It's when you prepare the weaving material yourself and do it correctly, it's incredibly durable. And of course, a handmade frame, which follows the grain of the wood, is also extremely durable. So you can't compare a modern manufactured snowshoe to a well-made traditional snowshoe in terms of the lifespan of it. Now, this square-toe snowshoe, it's a common frame from here in Minnesota, east to Maine, and all the way north. Huron people made the square-toe single piece. The Tikmek, of course, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Maine, Penobscot. I'm sure I'm just naming a few that I am familiar with, but I have a picture of a man from White Earth here in Minnesota in the 40s with this style. So, what we call the Ojibwe snowshoe now is that double-pointed upturned toe. Well, it's, there's a lot of snowshoes styles made by each individual, individual maker within a band or a tribe. So, this is a very common across eastern North America style with different variations. And the patterned weaving, when I spent time, I got excited about traditional snowshoes spending time with Cree people in northern Quebec. And all of their snowshoes were finely woven. And many of them had patterning, most of them. And there was no such thing as a coarse, crude snowshoe. Every snowshoe was beautiful. And the care that went into it was extraordinary, still making them. So that's been my inspiration, is seeing that. And it also depends on the snow conditions up there. You have endless, deep, powdery snow, so fine weave is helpful. So I have here, this is a bear, what we're calling a bear paw snowshoe. Again, no upturned toe. I could put an upturn in them, but I don't, because I'm interested in wearing snowshoes that people have worn forever that didn't have upturned toes. So this one particular, and this isn't necessarily a traditional style. This bear paw, it's a two-piece frame. There's a splice in the center. So there's one piece there, another piece there. They're pegged. And then the weaving helps to hold it together also. But, this is, right here is what we think of as a modern bear paw. And this is an old native snowshoe made by Innu, and they're in northeast Canada, to the east of the Athabascan and Cree, and they're also related to all those people with a similar language, and related to, linguistically to Anishinaabe also. And so this is, I've heard it called an elbow snowshoe, and I don't know why, but this Innu snowshoe is the closest I can come to the modern bear paw, but of course it's much wider, not necessarily longer, because we're talking deep snow conditions for people who need to use them. And these would be, when I was with Cree people working in the woods, this style, though it wasn't their traditional style, and they were wearing a commercially manufactured that was more just a straight oval with less interesting bends here. But that was what my friend would wear, cutting line for a trap line, cutting trees, and wearing, using his chainsaw and axe in the woods, because you could turn, you don't catch on anything. Super mobile, versatile, wood snowshoe. And then this modern, of course, has got the upturned toe, and much smaller and narrower, suited for packed trails. I wove these many years ago, the first thing I'd ever wove. And they're still hanging in there. Of course, the nylon's starting to bust. But when I made them, I was so excited, wove them, was so excited, and there was 2 feet of powdery snow out in Minnesota winter, and I put them on, and I jumped into the snowbank. I was so excited, and it didn't do hardly anything for me. I was very disappointed, but that's because the modern thing, it's a trail shoe basically, or light snow, or good for sugaring, or once you have a packed trail down, useful, or if you're smaller. But for my size, and this is just my this is my take on a traditional Innu frame. I'm basing this off of a picture and the measurements. So there's a lot of variation in the width and length and roundness and shape, but I like this one, so I still need to weave it. And this is Athabascan snowshoe, what a lot of people now call an Alaskan snowshoe, but used by Athabascan people in northwest North America. And these are birch frames, white birch. You can see there's an extra crossbar at the tail to account for the length and support. A whole different take on the underfoot weave that people use there. And this is moose hide for the underfoot, deer hide for the tips and tails. That'd be pretty traditional, or caribou would be traditional for tips and tails. And yeah, good. These would be a hunting snowshoe, and these are actually a little small for someone my size. These only go up to just below my chin. They should go up to my nose to be sized traditionally. And these are for breaking trail, hunting, running down a moose in the spring. In particular, these would be really good during April when the snow gets hard and crusty, but it's really deep. You could float on these on the crust because they're so long, and they're not super wide, so you could run easily. And where the moose will be punching through and cutting their arms on that crusty snow. It's hard for them to move that time of year, their legs. So this is a hunting snowshoe. They have another style that's shorter and with a double pointed end for once the trail is broken, a camp snowshoe. A couple styles up there, and this is a splice at the center. So these are two things that are spliced and then wrapped. They're pegged and wrapped. So Athabascan. I don't have a good example of the what people now call the Ojibwe snowshoe, pointed both ends with an upturned toe. The ones I have currently seen in usage are with, again, up north with Cree people. They have a different look and feel to them than this modern Ojibwe snowshoe, and I suspect, well, just like this is an adaptation of an old form, I suspect what we now call the Ojibwe snowshoe is an adaptation and not a faithful representation of an old Ojibwe snowshoe. But I haven't seen many authentic examples of those old ones, and I'm looking for them. And if you have someone in your family or old photos of your grandpa or whoever that has made snowshoes like that, I'd be very interested in hearing about it. So, as far as weaving, this is a homemade deer rawhide. I've scraped the hair and grain layer off, the layer underneath the hair. I dried it in the winter. It's freeze-dried, so that's why it's really white. It absorbs moisture really easily, so it's easy to work with, to re-wet. And homemade deer hide is incredibly strong. The lacing just goes and goes. If you want to get into traditional snowshoe making, learn how to make your own rawhide. Commercially manufactured rawhide, I don't know that I would trust to be nearly as strong as properly prepared homemade. And I've soaked this in wood ash briefly and scraped it off. Some I don't even bother with wood ash, I just soak in water. And this is some Caribou Rawhide here. You're probably going to have trouble getting that around Minnesota, but I got this in northern Quebec with Cree people, processed a few caribou. Incredibly thin. You can see it's almost translucent. It is translucent. And but extremely strong despite being thin, which is why it was preferred for weaving tips and tails. You can cut it fine and do patterning, but still have strong weaving. And this is a beaver, small beaver that I made rawhide with, and supposedly it's more moisture resistant. It doesn't absorb moisture as readily as some other skins, and so people, I've heard, would occasionally use it for spring snowshoes for the wet time of year. It would keep your snowshoes from getting quite as soggy and wet. So those are some rawhide options. Hand tools, we have the crooked knife, wagi koman by the Ojibwe, mokatagan and the Cree, and many names used all over North America, different variations and forms. But used in combination with an axe, it's really your two primary tools for making traditional snowshoes. Everything's split out, axe down to a stave, and then like this is a black ash stave I dried. But then after you'd roughed out, held with your palm up, pulled towards you. I'm just trying to take a few little curls here. I don't know if it's in focus, but yeah, that's the idea. So that's my primary tool, as well as once it's just a carving axe. Once it's split apart, these are all homemade tools, also, which is part of the tradition. Any traditional craft is making your tools to suit you, and I've tried to adhere to that. And so here's this is really cool. This is from the Athabascan Snowshoe book. This little mortise chisel, and so cutting the mortise for the crossbars. It's got a shoulder here. You just pound it in up to the shoulder, and that's your depth gauge, your width here. And a 1/4-inch chisel just for cleaning out the mortise. And block plane for cleaning up the edges of the stave. We got a couple resources here. There's not many books on snowshoe making. Here's the one. If you're going to go for it, get it. And it's hard to come by, actually. You have to buy it from Henry Valancourt, and he's hard to get a hold of. But this has got it all. This documents a man, got history and all this stuff, and this man right here, Mortise Chisel, it documents him making a pair of snowshoes meticulously from beginning to end. So it's got all the different stages, weaving patterns, fancy patterns. It's got how to prepare your moose hide. Get it if you can. If you're going to get into it, it's $50. And then this is the only one other one I've been able to find. And it's more shop oriented, which is fine. Go for it. Use your shop. Use your power tools. It's got forms, different forms you can build. Ideas on how to build and use forms. It's got a weaving section, which I don't particularly like, but it'll work. There's just some ways that he lays it out that are a little bit confusing, but yeah, for more shop style nylon lacing, good starter to get into things. And here's a little form I made just for teaching classes. Bear paw, flat, double-sided, very simple. Slides under there, clamp here, clamp here. It doesn't have to be too complicated. When you get into the upturned toe, it gets more complicated. Your form making gets definitely more involved. So yeah, there's just a quick overview of some different styles of snowshoes. And yeah, as you notice, they're all big, and that's because snowshoes are meant to float on snow. Not necessarily to go for a walk on a trail, traditionally, of course. So it's been interesting for me learning not just to make them, but how to use them. That's a whole nother element. And then, of course, really simple bindings. These are all in that Athabascan Snowshoe book here. Your foot just goes in and just like that. So very simple but effective binding. Works best with homemade winter moccasins, mucklucks. It can work with modern boots, but not very well. Your toe has more grip when you're wearing an all buckskin muckluck. I find it works a lot better for me that way. Yeah. If people have questions, do get in touch. There's a look at traditional snowshoe making. Someday it'd be fun to do a more in-depth presentation on all the different elements, but this will give you something to think about and some resources. All these are split and carved, bent by hand, green wood, working with fresh wood, no forms, and the form replaces skill, so it can be helpful when you're learning. And the best way to learn is to break a bunch of, to spend days of your life making staves that you're going to break. And you've got to start over, and then you're going to make a real ugly snowshoe, and that's good. Do it. Go, make something funky, and then keep going. My first pair is hung up in the woods somewhere. I don't even remember where. I learned a lot, and I wish I had a picture. Oh, the final resource I would mention is John Beltman's snowshoe making class at the North House Folk School. There are not many people who teach making and lacing snowshoes. So keep an eye out for his class every fall, early winter, or sometimes midwinter. He does it, I know. So that would be a great resource, and I'm sure it fills up fast. But yeah, he's an excellent teacher. So check that out, and good luck.